Welcome back, fellow Starship builders, and I want to open this chapter with the exciting news that Walker Street Shipyards has moved. We are still, of course, in the same digital location on my YouTube channel, Walker Street Shipyards, but the actual physical shipyards, the building space, has moved to a new location. I mentioned in an earlier chapter my fiance Eileen, and so over the last month or so I have moved from my house, the house that launched Walker Street Shipyards, into her much larger two-story house. It's been about 6 weeks or so since I've done any building, had the opportunity to do any building on the ship with the move, but I'm happy to say the move has gone mostly smoothly. Everything came over. I thought perhaps that I had lost one piece, one of the Paragraphics Photo Etch grill components for the impulse engines, but I was able to track it down and find it. I have set up the new workspace and done a test of all of the lighting, and I'm happy to say that in the transfer that all the electrical systems have remained in place. The static lighting is still working across the secondary hull. Also, I did a test on all the static lighting in the saucer and have done a test on the tenant controls automated lighting sequences. Everything is operational. So this is an exciting step, and I want to welcome everyone to the all-new Walker Street Shipyards. For Chapter 13, I am going to continue work on the saucer with the goal of taking all of the lighting, which is at this point now mostly tenant controls LEDs, and to affix them into their correct places in the saucer. There's a few that are going to have to remain unfixed, such as the two that are going to sit at the end of the nacelles. But get them placed where they need to go all throughout the saucer. Get the tenant control circuitry board placed where it's going to house, probably somewhere around in here on the top of the saucer. I'm really grateful that I took the step several chapters back of color coding a lot of this wiring and having a color index that I made up, because I'll be honest, after about 6 weeks of no work on the Enterprise, when I started to hook the wiring up, it was a little bit bewildering, and I really couldn't quite remember what went where. Fortunately, I was able to refer back to my color chart and get everything hooked back up and operational again. So that is a step that I highly recommend. And of course you can see this advanced labeling system, like I said before, of the blue painter's tape. Everything is as it should be and working where it should be. And so now the next step is going to be transferring all of the LEDs into their appropriate places on the saucer. I promised in the last chapter I would crack into the nacelles some. I've done a little bit of work on the nacelles. I've done some of the light blocking on the interior with black paint. So thanks for coming back. Thank you for joining me in Chapter 13. Welcome to the all-new Walker Street Shipyards. And one other thing, some of my followers who know that I have moved and know that I now have a new physical street address, they have asked that I not change the name and keep it Walker Street Shipyards. So I'll be happy to do that, just for the sake of simplicity, and they kind of like the way it sounds. Welcome back, so let's get started. At the end of Chapter 11, I talked about constructing a better support mechanism to hold the receptacle for the 2 amp 12 volt power unit. This is the receptacle here, and this is the jack which plugs in from the outside of the base, and I worried that the thin wall of the base here that I had cut a hole in would not provide enough of a glue point for the receptacle, and with repeated use of plugging in the jack, that it might one day just push this receptacle in. So in addition to gluing it in place with two-part epoxy, I took this piece, which is a window piece that I didn't use, and sheared it off right here, so I had sort of this L-shaped portion, painted it black, and I have a leg right here and then a leg that goes around the bottom that provides a deeper glue point surface for the receptacle to glue into. And then in addition to that, took a heavy duty sprue, a thick sprue, cut it to shape, painted it black, and ran it between the bulkhead and the back of the receptacle to hold it more firmly in place. This way, with repeated use, when the jack gets pushed in, this is going to be held more secure and stay in place. Well, my first build, after 2 years, I haven't had a problem, and this is held in place. I started to make my way around the saucer to set the Tenna Controls activated flashing navigation lights. On the starboard side is a flashing green navigation light. On the port side is a flashing red navigation light. There's a flashing white light at the very front and flashing white lights on either side of the impulse crystal housing. There's also a flashing white strobe light that goes on the very top of the bridge dobe assembly, and as I've yet to set the bridge at the top of the saucer, then that's going to be one of the last things that I will do prior to gluing the top half of the saucer down to the bottom half, which I had set at the top of the ship's hull. And so those lights, again, you have red on the port side, a flashing green on the starboard side, a flashing white on the front of the saucer, and your flashing whites on either side of the impulse crystal array. I have already done a lot of experimenting to set the starboard green light. One of the challenges is that the bulbs provided by Tenna Controls, the LED bulbs, are a little bit out of scale, meaning they are really a little bit too large to really come up through these holes, these port holes. I like the fact that molded into the saucer are these great little nipple rings. I wanted to have just the very top of the LED dome protrude from the top of this little hole here. Unfortunately, it's the bulb is just too big. I have widened the hole a little bit with a hobby knife from the inside and from the outside to allow the bulb to go a little bit further up. It still seats just a tiny bit below the surface of the hull. To really make this hole big enough for that bulb to come completely out, you would have to bore it out with a Dremel or a drill to a pretty good degree, and that's just a much bigger hole that I would want to do, plus the fact that you would completely lose the great little molded nipple. So what you see here, this green starboard navigation light, actually sits a little lower than the surface of the saucer housing, but I'm pretty pleased with that look. You still get a nice light effect coming through there. I've observed it from across the room, and it is sufficient to see, especially when it's blinking. So from here, I'm going to continue to make my way around and set the other navigation lights. So in addition to the fact that the navigation LED bulb is too large for the hole where it pokes out through the top of the saucer, the cavity that the LED goes into is very small, very cramped, and it is really impossible to get hands or tweezers or toothpicks or anything else in there other than the bulb itself. So it takes a little bit of maneuvering, a little bit of engineering to figure out how to get the bulb seated in the right spot and glued in place and then held while the canopy glue dries. This is what I came up with. So I've done a few test fits of the red navigation light down into the hole, into this well. You really just have to do it by feel and move it around till it is down as far and as firm as it can go. And my next step, as I have done already with the green navigation light as a test, and it's worked pretty well, is I'm going to apply a little bit of canopy glue around the lower portion, being careful not to get any on the tip of the bulb itself. It will go down into the cavity, and again it's just a process of feeling till I have got it set as firm as it's and as far down as it's going to go. Then I'm going to take the really functional, really handy multi-purpose Gorilla Grip wall mounting putty, and apply a little there and a little here, just to hold it firmly in place as the canopy glue cures. I'm going to do a little test. I turned it on, and although the camera can't see it, I am taking a look and seeing that yes, the light is set as far down as it can go, and yes, I can see that there is a little bit of a light leak that's poking through right here, and I'm going to have to take care of that. Of course, this is the hatch door is going to sit on top of that. That will be one of the final things done as part of the saucer assembly. So now I'm going to let this cure and can go do a few final steps to get it firmly in place. I will of course have to very carefully bend these leads, including this resistor right here, so that they'll lay a little bit more flat along the interior of the saucer and allow room for this to seat when I go to glue it to the lower saucer portion. So that is now two navigation lights set, the green starboard light and the red light on the port side. After setting all of the navigation and strobe lights around the upper and lower saucer rim and threading through the upper Bridgestone strobe light, also wiring in place the end of the nacelle strobe lights and the chiller grills, each time I went in and checked the lights with a 9-volt battery and just touched the leads to make sure the strobe and navigation lights, the lights for the amber lights for the impulse engines and the changing amber blue light for the warp sequence that's fed through the tenant control boards could not touch with the 9-volt batteries because they do not have resistors. I'm guessing that the resistor function is somehow incorporated into the board. So there's a little bit of uncertainty after placing those and waiting to see if that was all going to work. But once I had everything in place and I did some testing of the static lighting around the upper and lower saucer, fed everything that needed to go down through this lead back down through the dorsal neck, and that included once again the wires for the strobe lights at the end of the nacelles, the wires for the changing amber and blue light. It was time to put the tenant controls board in place. I am very grateful that I color coded and used the shrink tubing and did a lot of the color coding and made a color chart for the tenant controls lights and designating the difference between the tenant controls lights and wiring and the static wiring, because after about 6 weeks of not looking at everything and touching everything, and after having dismantled my assembly yards from one location and building everything in a new location, I sort of lost track of what was supposed to go where, and it was very handy to be able to go back and check those charts. So I have set the antenna controls circuitry board. The board is square, and of course this dome is a curved surface, so there's no way to really firmly set down all four corners and all points. So I used the Gorilla Grip wall mounting putty, and put four corners down and set it in that. At first I thought this was just going to be temporary and I would ultimately glue them, the points, but they are in there pretty good. It's a nice firm fit, so I think I'm going to leave this. Again, as I've said, I've used this wall putty in my first build to do some lighting runs and to set some of the spotlights, such as at the front of the nacelles, and they have never come loose. So I'm pretty confident that this is going to be a nice permanent hold for the antenna control circuitry board. Then did a test lighting test run where I hooked everything up, and yay, everything fired up, everything did exactly what it was supposed to. The strobe lights strobed at one speed, the navigation lights blinked at another speed, and the entire impulse warp sequence with the color changing amber to blue deflector dish bulb all worked just perfectly. So then I very carefully pulled out one lead at a time and shrink wrapped everything, and then reset them all. At this point, the shrink wrapping, the color is a little bit arbitrary because I know where everything is going to go. I just wanted to make sure that the appropriate size shrink wrap, and this was all just to make sure that when I flip the saucer lid over and put it down in place, that these wires don't pull out, because of course once that saucer is sealed and glued together, there's no way to go, there will be no way to get back in and resecure everything. So I am making sure that these are as permanent connections as possible. So here we have all lights turned on. It's a shame in this angle you really can't see the lights in the secondary hull, but they really look gorgeous. But you can see the flashing strobe lights and navigation lights of the antenna controls lighting. Get a little bit of an idea of the static lighting by these window lights around the saucer, as well as this bright light coming through the officer's lounge, and then there's a really great floodlight effect that comes from the bridge dome. The bridge dome is not secured, it's not glued down, so there's some pretty horrendous light leaks. You can see this great strobe effect there, and then with an activation, the impulse lights come on, your impulse crystal and your grill engine lights right here. With a further activation, the impulse goes out and your chiller grills come on. Those of course are going to be mounted inside the nacelles, as is these two flashing strobe lights on the very tippy end of the nacelles. Then with another activation, chiller grills go out, your warp engines go off, your impulse engines come back on. This pretty much, and again you can't see the static lighting in the windows of the secondary hull, nor certainly you can't see, you know, in here in the shuttle bay or the lights in the back of the shuttle bay, but all of this is on. This represents about 90% of the lighting for the entire ship. Everything wired, everything working. There will be 4 more amber lights that will go around. There will be the RCS thrusters going around the deflector dish housing. I'm trying to make up my mind whether I'm going to put 2 amber lights as RCS thrusters, the back end of the nacelles. Sometimes I like that look, sometimes I don't. I'm just trying to figure out. I do have 2 wires run just for those lights if I decide to go with them. Then there will of course be the 4 spotlights, 2 on each side on the forward portion of the nacelles, that the spots that shine on some of the registry markings. So this is a pretty big step that I'm quite pleased with, that at this stage all the lights are working. It's just a matter of putting everything in place And now the next big step is going to be securing the top saucer half to the bottom saucer half. So now I'm ready to take a deep breath and flip this upper saucer portion over and cement it down, secure it to the lower saucer, which I had already secured to the top of the dorsal. It may look a little bit chaotic in here, but I've gone through with the wall putty, the Gorilla Grip wall putty, and anchored down these wire runs because I want to make sure that none of the wires come loose and hang down and interfere in these glue posts. The same is true for these around the rim, and the same is true of the posts that stick up from the bottom of the lower saucer. I had a bit of an issue on a test, and this is why it's great to do tests, with this assembly here, which is the amber impulse crystal assembly. This black thing that you see here was the top of what I believe might have been a cat litter jug, and it was higher, it was thicker, and I spray painted it silver, drilled a hole in it. This is the back of the amber impulse crystal light, because it made a nice diffuse light and really looked fantastic in that crystal. But when I did a test, then discovered that it was too thick to seat down in this area, which is where it's going to go. So I went back with the Dremel and dremeled off all but the very top rim, and then hit on the idea of doing this, which is covering it with the silver metallic reflective tape. I did a test where I just put the amber light inside the impulse crystal without any type of housing, and it really looked awful. It wasn't atmospheric at all. It wasn't ambient at all. It really didn't light up the entire crystal. It just had a single hot spot dead in the center. It just really looked terrible. So you really do need to have something that's going to back or contain that impulse crystal to make this light be more ambient and fully radiate the entire light. But then, of course, as I discovered, you have to make sure that it's not too thick. This works out great. I've measured it, and it should be just fine. It looks fantastic. For the lower saucer portion, I have gone in and, in addition to the white paint that I did way back after light blocking the saucer, in strategic areas, put the silver aluminum tape to be reflective of a lot of the static window lighting. They'll bounce off this and hopefully make the interior brighter, and hopefully make those windows brighter, especially the windows up at the very top of the bridge assembly bulb. I've also measured to make sure there's clearance for the circuitry board here. It shouldn't interfere with the peg right here, but I've measured and it shouldn't interfere. Now, one of the things, I went back for some guidance and I looked at Matt's videos on how he secured these two pieces, and again, it was in one of Matt's videos that I first saw that he mounted the lower saucer and then came back and enclosed the upper saucer. I also watched Boyd's posts in TrekWorks. He was a lot more traditional, which is how most builders did it, which is again how I did it in my first build, in that you get all of your wiring, you get all of your lighting in place, and then you secure the upper and lower saucer half. You go ahead and glue them together, wait for them to cure, and then you attach that to the upper dorsal and the body of the ship. One of the things that he recommended was to go back into these points. Now, one of the most notorious problems with this build, certainly for the saucer section, is around this rim, trying to get a good seal that after you glue it, it's almost impossible to get a really tight seal, and you get light leaks around this rim. Just about everybody encounters those to various degrees, and then that means you're going to come back and have to do a lot of puttying and a lot of sanding and some spot painting, so you don't have those light leaks. What Boyd had recommended to help mitigate them as much as possible is he had discovered that these posts were a little too long and actually prevented the two saucer halves from seating completely, meaning that this rim portion would not secure as tightly as possible. He removed them completely, which I think is a bit radical. So what I did is went in and actually sawed them in half. So I left the remaining posts that will go into the open sections in the upper saucer. I'm having some second thoughts about maybe I shouldn't have done it for all of them. These here in the center, for instance, I think these are going to be a really difficult target to hit, as opposed to the ones around the rim, which are going to be a lot easier to eyeball and secure. So it's going to take some feeling around to make sure that my center beams and my center posts are securing. Well, I had a near disaster when I set the upper saucer onto the lower saucer and secured it in place. I did a final lighting test, made sure that everything was working, and switched off the lights before I flipped over this part, the upper saucer. I got a really good fit onto the lower saucer. All the connection points seated very well, nice firm fit, as close as possible around the rim of the saucer. Clamped it all up, and then just on a whim decided maybe I better do one final lighting test once everything had been clamped in place, and boy am I glad I did. Switched it on, and the antenna controls lights were working fine, but none of the static lighting elements worked. None of the window lights would light up. Switch it on and off a few times, with no results. Couldn't get any of the window lights to work. So very quickly, because everything had been glued, got my hobby knife out, went around the rim and cracked everything open. As soon as I got a little bit of separation of the elements, a little bit of separation around the rim of the saucer, and the saucer raised up just a tiny bit, all of the static lighting came on. And so when I pressed the rim back down, it switched off. With a little bit of experimenting very quickly, because again the glue was curing, I was able to determine that when I pressed down on the port side, just next to the impulse crystal array, that's when the lights would go out, and when I let it up, they would come back on. So I had no choice. I removed the saucer very carefully and really saw how good and firm a fit that I had gotten. Set it aside, took a deep breath, walked away from it for a few hours to let the glue cure, then come back to try to cure and harden and try to determine really what had happened. And this is what I discovered. In trying to figure out why, when pressing on that area, I identified the problem as right here, the Paragraphics Photo Etch rec deck component. This little 3-light lighting strip I actually had installed under here. It was on the underside of the rec deck, and that provided some top-down lighting that really had a nice lighting effect and flooded the inside of the rec deck. But, and remember that you're looking at the bottom of the rec deck here, what I believe had happened is when pressed down, the metal of the rec deck was making contact with the leads, the positive and negative leads of this lighting strip, and shorting out the entire static lighting system. So really had no choice. I peeled up this piece, peeled off the rec deck piece, and at that point everything worked just fine. I removed this little teeny lighting strip and tried to figure out what to do with it. I actually thought about the easiest thing would be to just cut it off, but I wanted to preserve it in some way. So in the end, I decided to just mount it right here behind the rec deck. I'm going to lose that great top-down lighting effect. I'm going to get a little bit of backlighting. But honestly, you know, the rec deck is a component that's very difficult to see into. And I can accept that loss just to make sure that everything else works. So at this point, now that I know that everything's working, I am once again, and yes, I have gone around and I have scraped off and sanded off all of the dried glue before I glue these two units together. So again, I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to glue it down. This is a really great example that when it comes to this kit, it's good to test often. And make sure that everything is working, because if I had not tested after that final assembly and I had let that glue cure, there would have been no way I would have been able to get back into this kit. So it was a near disaster that was averted, again, by testing. The upper saucer section is now glued in place onto the lower saucer section and clamped. I'm going to give the testers regular styrene glue about 6 hours to cure, then take the clamps off and fire up the lights, and pretty much consider this experiment in closing the saucer section up a success. The clamps are off from around the rim of the saucer, and I'm happy to report there is a good firm solid seating of the upper saucer component with the lower saucer component. And that all of the lighting systems are operating as they should. All of the static lighting systems, from the floodlights at the very top of the bridge dome to the lights at the back of the shuttle bay and down below the bottom of the secondary hull, all of the lights that are in place for the end of the nacelles are working, and then the tenant controls systems with your strobe lights, such as this one at the top of the bridge dome, and the green navigation light, the red navigation light, and the forward and rear navigation light. All of these systems are working. So at this point, I would say that I'm pleased that I mounted the saucer this way instead of mounting the two components, the upper saucer and lower saucer, together and then mounting them to the dorsal. I'm happy that I went with this method of mounting the lower saucer first, doing a lot of the wiring and a lot of the light placement, and then doing a lot of the wiring and light placement inside of the upper saucer separately, and then at the right time, at the right juncture, gluing the top saucer half down to the lower saucer half. I've talked about in the last chapter and some in this chapter the different reasons why I did it that way, and I think it has worked out great. And so I would really recommend it, and if I were to ever build this kit or other kits like it again, would probably go with that method. Once again, I want to thank Matt of Matt's Model Work for having tried it himself and inspiring me to do so, and messaging me about the different reasons why he thinks it's a good method. Again, I'm pretty pleased with the way that it came out. So this is a great place to wrap up chapter 13. What am I going to be doing next for chapter 14? Well, it's now time to fully seat this strobe light into the upper bridge dome, which right now has not been set down. So I want to seat that, and then of course do all of your light leaking and puttying and things. Speaking of light leaks, of course, because it is the saucer section, I do have light leaks around the rim, and so I'm going to be doing some puttying and sanding and maybe even some spot painting to mitigate those. I keep threatening to do the chiller grills and to get started on the nacelles, so perhaps I will include that in chapter 14. It's also, of course, time to really get started on the deflector dish, because with the deflector dish component in place, I can make all these connections for all of the static lighting, get everything very carefully tucked away in the secondary hull, and mount the deflector dish housing onto the front. So again, very happy. The saucer is completely in place. This is really a major step in this build. So thanks for getting this far with me, and I look forward to seeing everyone. Chapter 14, Walker Street Shipyards.